Welcome back, everyone. This is Ayad Boudiab, and we are continuing our discussion on Angular. And in this case, we're still talking about the services. So specifically today, I would like to talk about calling a service that returns for me some JSON data, and I need to be able to process that data somehow. So I'm using the HTTP service, and as we'll see, the HTTP service uses the regular functionality that we are familiar with. So we can use HTTP GET, HTTP POST, HTTP PUT, and HTTP DELETE, right? The GET is obviously to get the data, POST to post new data to the server, PUT is to update, and then DELETE is to delete any records that you have in there. So then what I need to do is to create a controller and then be able to make a call to the HTTP service. I will depend on the HTTP service to provide me the data. I'm going to use a just special service in here for the geo names. I will show you the URL in the code, but that's not the case. That's not the main key in here. I can use any service to get some JSON data back, right? And for example, I can use a web API, talk into a specific web API, get the data back, JSON format, work with that data in my service. That's one way of doing this, but obviously anything that returns JSON data for you would do the job. In this case, I just looked up on the internet, found a free one, and I'm going to use it to return some data and work with that data and show you how we can use the HTTP GET to proceed with that. So then, how does the service look like? I'm going to place that URL in the browser and be able to make the call to the service. So here's the data, right? I'll make a call to a specific service here. And by the way, you will see that full URL in the code, so don't worry about it for now. What you see in here is the data that the code returns, the call returns. I can beautify this, right? I can highlight the whole thing, copy it, and then I can go over to Google here and I say JSON formatter. I found a formatter. This would do. It does formats and validates. I need to load that formatter and be able to just make the data look nice, because I need to understand the structure of the data, right? Because when I go to my HTML, I'm going to use an ng repeat to loop over my results and basically be able to display some data, right? So I need to know how the data looks like. So I'm going to paste it here and I'm going to process it. It should give me some results. It says, here's the geo names. You see that there is a set of data in here, the country code, the name, Wikipedia link, and so on. But as you can see, this is an array of stuff, right? That's why I need to use ng repeat to loop over all that data. Okay, so that's the service. That's what it returns for me, and I need to be able to use that within my code. So I need to go back to the plunker in here and remember that this is plnkr.co, right? And in the plunker, I'd like to make some changes to my script.js and index.html so I'll be able to display that data. And once I'm done with that, I'll be able to, of course, first I need to build my controller and see how we can work with promises. And then once that when that's done, then I can make my changes for my index.html. Launch the editor. That should take me to the place where I can make my changes. And don't forget that you can always come here and make the changes in the settings. In this case, I'm using Twilight theme, font size 15, so we can see the content. And then auto refresh means it's going to display for me the results every second. So this is pretty much here the HTML. And I need to make sure a couple of things are working first. First of all, I need to make sure that I'm referencing Angular and making sure that it's working properly before I make any changes, right? So in here, it says find an external library. I can click on this, and obviously Angular is the first one. I could search for anything, but since Angular is already available, I click on this link on here, and that would add Angular to my scripts, right? And in the HTML, I can always say ng app And of course, I didn't have to have it here. I could have it in the body or within a div and so on. And down at the anywhere in the body, I can just type an expression just to make sure that things are working properly. I can come over to the right hand side, click on the live preview, and I should have hello plunker, and then underneath it some value if this is refreshing properly. And here it is, hello plunker 4. Okay, that tells me that 4 is being evaluated, therefore it is working. Okay, I can remove that. All right, now I can go to my script.js and start making my changes for my scripts, for my code. All right, so the first thing that I need to start with is be able to create a module, right? So var app equal Angular dot module, and then I will need to give that module a name. Let's call it main module, and then that does not depend on anything else, square brackets, right? All right, now in the in here I'm going to create my controller. Since I'm working with data, I'm calling it data controller, and that will be equal to function, and that function will be here. That's the body of the function. Okay, now remember, I need to add things to the scope, so I need to say $scope here, and I'm using the HTTP service. I need to use $HTTP. Okay, so I need to make sure that I have those available for me, and then when I'm done with my controller, I need to add that to the module. So let me do this before I forget, right? App dot controller, right? And then I need to give it the actual name that I'm working with. That's the data controller. And then after that, I need to specify my controller in the square bracket. But since the controller depends on scope and HTTP, and I may need to make sure that those are also available here. Scope and HTTP. So now I have created a module, I've created a controller, and I have added the controller to the module. Okay, now I can just start building my controller. Remember in here that first of all I need to make sure I need to make a call to an HTTP GET to get some data from the service. I need to provide the URL. So over here I would say $HTTP dot get, and I need to provide it the actual URL. Here's the URL. All right, now if you just been coding with that for a while, you might notice the problem. But let's say in here that I need to store that result, right? I need to know what this call is giving me back. So I would say var result equal. But this is an issue here. The problem is that when you make HTTP calls, they are async calls, which means that you don't get the data back right away. It might be within a second, within a few milliseconds, within 5 seconds, you never know. So basically you need to provide some type of callback to be able to restore the results. So this var result equal will not do the work. So I need to remove it. It turns out that in JavaScript I can use what we call promises. And promises, as the name implies, it's a promise that it will call something for you when the data is available. And the way we do this in Angular is by saying then, right? Then here I'm going to provide the success, and then I'm going to provide the failure. Okay, so I'm going to provide two functions here. Function that represent the success. Let's call it, for example, on data complete, and a function that represents the failure. Let's call it on error. Right? Okay, so I need to provide those functions. Those two functions, I need to write them. Let's go ahead and write them up here. So var on data complete, this one, equal function, and then this function takes a response, the response that you get back when the data is actually complete, right? So response will contain for you the data when that's available. Because remember, the promise says when I get the response back from the call, I'm going to call this guy if there's a success. I'm going to call this guy if there's a failure. So in this case, I'm going to put the data on the scope. So $scope dot data, let's call it data, equal response dot data. So I get the data from the response, I put it on the scope so I can use it in my HTML. The second thing is the function for the error. So var on error equal a function. The function takes a reason. The reason says why something didn't work right. Okay. And in this case, I could interrogate the reason and find all the details. But for my purpose in this case, I'm going to just simply say scope.error equals something went wrong with the service call. Okay, so that will take care of the case when something is not working. Okay, so this is the success, this is the failure. I specified the then, and then I specified my success function and my failure function. One thing that I'd like to beautify a little bit in here is that app and data controller, these are like global variables here. We don't want to use global variables, but what we can use is something called an IFE, which is just IIFE. It's pronounced IFE. That's just simply, it's the abbreviation for immediately invoked function expressions. So basically, I'm going to immediately invoke a function in here. That way the global variables are not global anymore. They're wrapped up within a function. Let's make sure that this is fixed here. There's a semicolon at the end. And then I'm going to close that. Right? This is the function. Let's beautify it. Okay? So this is the function that I'm going to call. And now all the variables are within that function. But there's one more thing that I need to do. In order for this function to work, I want to call it. So I put the parenthesis and also make sure that the whole function is wrapped up with the parenthesis like that. So now I have a immediately invoked function expression. All the variables are within that function, so I don't have global variables anymore. And that's all what I need to do. Let's go ahead and go back to the index.html and make my changes in there. For the index.html, I need to make sure, let's remove, by the way, the hello plunker. Let's put a div in there, and in that div I need to put the actual error if I get an error. Okay, and then I'm going to display a div for the table that contains the data that I get back from the service. Now remember, here's the service that you see, and you have geo names, right? And those geo names, they have some other information within them. That's the code that I want to use in here to display the city. So it's going to go Mexico City and so on, right? So within the geo names, there's that array of data. So then in this case, I need to go back to my plunker in here, and here is the div that contains the information. And in this case, I'm saying there's a table with the table header code name. Here's the table data. The table body contains a ng repeat that's going for every name in the data.geo names, right? Because that's the array that I get back from the data. Remember, the data is the data that it is here, the data that I put on the scope from the success of the call. And then I'm going to say ng repeat for each name on those names. I'm going to display the content over here, right? And then that will display for me the content for that data. And then need to make sure in here that the name of the controller is already available. So this is, remember, we called it, I'm sorry, not the controller, the module. We called it main module, I believe, right? So that's the name main module over here. That basically would be the ng app. So that's ng app equal main module, and then I will have the rest of the data in here, error if there's an error, and then the ng repeat that repeats over the names. Now if the actual code is wrong, let's say for example there's a misspelling in the actual service name, so I'm going to remove the G, and then if that's the case, it should be able to tell me that the once that refreshes, it should be able to tell me that the actual service did not succeed. Not sure why it's not displaying that for me here, but the service did not have the right URL, so it should be able to display for me the error here. And then if that service is available, then it should be able to display the data for me on this side. Now something is missing, something, maybe the service is not working or something is blocking the service call in my case, but that data should be displayed, and I can show you that in my other example. Here's the data being displayed, right? On the right hand side, I see the code name, Mexico City, and so on. That's just pretty much the loop. That's the ng repeat that's looping over the data and the geo names and displaying the content on the screen. So basically what we've done in here then is create a controller, and within that controller the key part that we're concentrating on is doing an HTTP GET. And then when we get something back, this when we use the then promise in this case to say, okay, in case of success, I want you to use on data complete. In case of error, I want you to use on error, and display the data for the user. And then when there's a success, I get the data back and I store it on the scope, and I display that in the HTML file. If there's something wrong, I should be able to interrogate the reason and display that, but in our case we only displayed an error message to the user, and also we display that in here. That's the error and this is the actual name. So I hope this discussion of using HTTP GET has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Ayad Boudiab, and you